Welcome to Complete Telltales channel. We hope you enjoy watching our video.
My name's Ryan. I'm 26, and for as long as I can remember, my family has had this uncanny ability to turn even the simplest situations into a test of loyalty, and I've never passed in their eyes. It's like they keep a mental scoreboard of every time I've failed to measure up, whether that's not eating enough at a family dinner, showing up 5 minutes late to a barbecue, or refusing to laugh at one of my dad's digs at me. If I push back even slightly, I'm told I'm too sensitive or trying to make myself the victim. That's just the environment I grew up in. Sarcasm and judgment disguised as family bonding. It had always been little moments, the kind you could almost brush off if you wanted to keep the peace. My dad, Mark, is the kind of man who thinks admitting weakness is a sin. His favorite phrases are "walk it off" and "stop making excuses." My Aunt Laura, his older sister, is cut from the same cloth, except she wraps her criticism in fake concern. She'll ask if I'm feeling okay, then follow it up with, "You've always been a bit fragile, haven't you?" My mom stays mostly quiet, though every so often she'll chime in just enough to keep herself from looking like she's not part of the group. And then there's my cousin Tyler, Aunt Laura's golden child. He's 30, still lives at home, and somehow never lifts a finger to help at gatherings. Yet he's constantly praised for being such a hard worker. I learned early on that family events weren't about enjoying each other's company. They were about proving yourself worthy of belonging. So I played along when I was younger. I smiled, helped with chores, tried to keep my head down. But no matter how much I pitched in, it always seemed like I was the first one to be criticized if something wasn't done right. My dad would find a way to twist it, and Aunt Laura would nod along, eyes sharp like she was taking notes for later. The day it happened, I'd already been dreading the family cookout. It was at my parents' house, which meant I couldn't exactly make an excuse to skip without causing a storm. The plan was the same as always: eat, chat, then clean up for hours while my dad and Tyler lounged in the living room watching TV. I told myself I'd just get through it quietly. I showed up on time, brought dessert, and even offered to help my mom set up before anyone else arrived. She accepted, but I could tell from her tone she thought it was the least I could do. By the time everyone was there, the air felt heavy, partly from the summer heat, partly from the usual tension. Conversations were light on the surface, but I caught the sideways glances when I didn't laugh at Tyler's jokes about me still being single. I kept busy, running back and forth between the kitchen and the yard, carrying trays of food, refilling drinks. The heat started getting to me at some point, and I felt this strange tightness in my chest. It wasn't like anything I'd felt before, a mix of pressure and dizziness. I tried to ignore it, figuring I just needed to sit for a minute. But when I finally leaned against the counter, my dad's voice cut through the background noise. "Quit faking it," he snapped from across the kitchen, eyes narrowing like I'd just committed a crime. "We still have dishes piled up in the sink. You're not getting out of helping." I opened my mouth to say something, to explain that I really didn't feel well, but before I could, Aunt Laura chimed in from the dining table. "Oh, please, Ryan. You've been pulling this act since you were a kid. The old, 'I'm not feeling well' trick to get out of cleaning. He's just tired from standing, Mark. Don't coddle him." Her words stung in that familiar way, like a slap wrapped in velvet. But before I could even think about defending myself, another wave of dizziness hit me. My vision blurred slightly, and I had to steady myself against the counter. My breathing felt shallow, each inhale shorter than the last. I could hear my pulse in my ears, fast and uneven, and a cold sweat started forming at the back of my neck. I just need." My voice sounded weak, even to me. I tried to take a deeper breath, but it felt like my chest was locked in place. "Oh, for crying out loud," my dad muttered. "Fine, sit down for a second. But don't think this means you're done helping." His words were sharp, almost impatient, like I'd just inconvenienced him. I tried to walk toward a chair, but halfway there, my legs buckled. I caught myself against the wall, and that's when my cousin Tyler looked up from his phone. "Man, you're being dramatic," he said with a smirk. "You should have been in theater." I wanted to shout at them, to make them see that this wasn't some performance, but my breaths were coming faster now, shallow and panicked. My chest burned. My hands tingled. I could feel the edges of panic closing in, though it wasn't the kind you could think your way out of. It was physical and voluntary. That's when my mom, finally, stood up and said, "Mark, maybe we should." But she didn't finish. Someone had already called for an ambulance. I didn't even see who. All I knew was that moments later, a paramedic was in front of me, crouched low to meet my eyes. "Sir, can you hear me? How long have you been having trouble breathing?" I tried to answer, but it came out as a strained gasp. He pressed 2 fingers to my neck, checking my pulse, and his expression changed instantly. "We need a stretcher now," he shouted toward the door. The shift in the room was immediate. Chairs scraped. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Aunt Laura's face went pale, and my dad froze like someone had hit pause on him. The noise of the party died, replaced by the quick, purposeful movements of the EMTs. And in that sudden, suffocating silence, every single one of them realized at the same time that something was seriously wrong. But instead of that instant outpouring of concern you'd expect from family, there was this awkward hesitation, like they didn't quite know how to act now that their lazy, dramatic narrative about me didn't fit. My dad stood there with his arms crossed, watching the EMTs wheel the stretcher in, as if waiting for them to declare it was all in my head. Aunt Laura had that tight, polite smile plastered on, the one she uses when she's pretending she didn't just insult someone. They got me onto the stretcher and started moving me toward the front door. I could hear snippets of their conversation behind me. Low, hushed tones, but I caught enough to piece together the gist. Aunt Laura said something like, "Well, you know Ryan. He probably just worked himself up. He's always been a bit theatrical." My dad mumbled something in agreement. Even now, as I was being taken to an ambulance, they were still clinging to the idea that I was faking. The ride to the hospital felt like it lasted both 2 minutes and 2 hours. My mind kept bouncing between the rising panic of what was happening to my body and this deep, hollow ache from knowing my own family had written me off so quickly. The EMT kept talking to me, telling me to focus on breathing as best I could, that they were getting oxygen ready. His voice was calm and steady, a lifeline I clung to. When I finally stabilized in the ER after tests and treatments, I was exhausted in a way I'd never felt before. Physically, mentally, emotionally. The doctor came in, serious but kind, and explained what had happened. I'd experienced a severe allergic reaction, likely from something I'd eaten at the cookout. My airway had started to constrict, my blood pressure had dropped, and if the ambulance had been delayed by even 10 minutes, things could have turned out very differently. It was a lot to take in, but before I could even process it, I noticed my dad leaning in the doorway of my hospital room. Aunt Laura was behind him, holding a coffee cup like this was just another casual visit. Tyler wasn't there. Apparently, he'd gone home because there was nothing more he could do. My mom was off in the corner, pretending to scroll on her phone, though I could see the worry in her eyes. "You good?" my dad asked, in the same tone you'd ask someone if they were done borrowing your lawnmower. The doctor gave him a sharp look, then repeated, almost word for word, that this was a life-threatening reaction and that I needed to take precautions from now on. He even told them the exact symptoms I'd been having, the ones they'd brushed off as laziness or dramatics. My dad nodded like he understood, but then said, "So, what? He's allergic to barbecues now." Aunt Laura laughed softly, like it was a harmless joke, and added, "We've all had food not agree with us before. You just push through." The doctor didn't laugh. He looked between them and me, clearly picking up on the dynamic, and said, "No, this isn't about pushing through. He could have died." His voice was firm enough to silence the room for a few seconds, but I knew my dad. That kind of silence wasn't acceptance, it was annoyance. I stayed in the hospital overnight for observation. My mom left early, saying she needed to get the house cleaned up after the party. Aunt Laura and my dad didn't come back the next morning. The only reason I got home was because a nurse arranged for a volunteer driver to take me. My own family didn't even bother to pick me up. When I walked into my apartment later that day, still feeling weak, there was already a text from my dad waiting for me. "Glad you're feeling better. Don't forget we've got the family reunion in 2 weeks." No apology. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just an expectation that I'd show up again, ready to play my role as the one they could mock or ignore until it was time to clean up. I tried to let it go, at least for a few days, telling myself maybe they were just uncomfortable with emotions and didn't know how to handle what happened. But then the stories started spreading. I heard from a cousin that Aunt Laura had been telling people I'd overreacted and caused a scene at the cookout, making everyone uncomfortable. She even claimed the EMTs didn't seem that concerned, and that the hospital kept me overnight just to be safe, not because it was serious. That was the moment the slow burn started in my chest. Not the tightness from before, but something sharper. Anger. The kind that doesn't flare up and fade, but simmers, gaining heat over time. I could have let it slide if they'd just been dismissive. That was normal. But rewriting the story to make me look bad? That was something else entirely. And when the next family event rolled around, the favoritism and quiet jabs were worse than ever. I didn't want to go to the reunion, but I also knew if I skipped it, they'd twist that into proof I was still sulking or trying to make everything about me. So, 2 weeks later, I showed up, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to see for myself how far they'd push this narrative. It was being held at Aunt Laura's place this year, a big suburban house with a yard that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. The kind of place where appearances mattered more than anything. When I arrived, she greeted me with that overbright, hostess smile. "Ryan, feeling better? You look fine now. Guess it wasn't as bad as they made it sound, huh?" She said it loud enough for the small cluster of relatives nearby to hear. I caught the little chuckles and side eyes. Inside, the dining table was already set with food. I scanned the spread and immediately noticed there were no labels on anything. After what happened last time, I was hyper-aware of what I ate. The doctor had told me to be cautious, avoid certain ingredients until I could get tested further. I asked Aunt Laura, quietly, if she could tell me what was in a few dishes just so I could avoid another ER visit. She waved her hand. "Oh, don't be dramatic. It's all homemade. It's fine. You're not going to have another one of your episodes." I bit my tongue and decided I'd just stick to the plain rolls and salad. But even that didn't go unnoticed. Tyler, already holding a plate stacked high with meat, pointed at me and said, "Still milking that barbecue thing, huh? You should just get over it." A few people laughed. My dad, sitting nearby, smirked instead of shutting him down. For the first hour, I kept to myself, eating quietly and making small talk with the few relatives who weren't openly mocking me. But as the afternoon went on, the mood shifted in a way I didn't see coming. Someone announced that it was game time, and they started setting up this trivia challenge they do every year. It's harmless, usually, except this time, I noticed something strange when I saw the prize on the counter, an envelope with my name written on it. I frowned and asked Aunt Laura about it, thinking maybe it was just a coincidence. She smiled slyly. "Oh, that? It's a little surprise. You'll see." When it was my turn to play, she made a point of calling everyone into the living room. "All right, everyone, this round is special. We've got a Guess the Lie game, starring Ryan." I froze in place as she continued. "We're going to read 3 stories about him. 2 are true, 1's made up, and you all have to guess which one's the fake." I wanted to object, but they'd already started. The first story was about how I once spilled a drink on my cousin at a wedding and blamed the bartender. True, but I was 15 and it was an accident. The second was about me pretending to be sick at last year's reunion to avoid helping clean. Completely false. And the third was about the cookout 2 weeks ago. Only, in their version, I pretended I couldn't breathe so I could get out of cleaning dishes, and the EMTs supposedly told me it was probably just nerves. They even added that I looked totally fine when I left in the ambulance. Everyone laughed. They were laughing at the thing that almost killed me. I could feel my hands trembling, heat crawling up my neck. My dad was in the corner, grinning. My mom sat stiffly but said nothing. Then Aunt Laura picked up the envelope. "Here's the fun part. If you guess the right one, you get this $50 gift card. If no one guesses, Ryan gets it." The guesses started flying. Some people thought the cookout story was fake. Others guessed the reunion one. But in the end, enough people guessed correctly, meaning they all decided the cookout story was true, and Aunt Laura handed the envelope to Tyler. Tyler tore it open, and I caught a glimpse inside before he could hide it away. It wasn't $50. It was a voucher for a barbecue restaurant. I don't think I've ever felt my stomach drop so fast. This wasn't just mocking anymore. This wasn't just favoritism. This was deliberate, targeted cruelty. They'd turned my allergic reaction into a family joke, complete with a prize, and made sure the person who'd mocked me the most got to wave it in my face. I left early that day without saying goodbye, but something inside me shifted on the drive home. The trust, whatever sliver of it I'd been holding on to, was gone. This wasn't about misunderstanding or generational differences anymore. This was about control, humiliation, and making sure I stayed in the role they'd assigned me. And that was the day I started planning exactly how I was going to take that role apart, piece by piece. The drive home from that reunion felt longer than any road I'd ever taken. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, looping over every laugh, every smirk, every sideways glance I'd just endured. The barbecue voucher image kept flashing in my head like a neon sign. I could hear Tyler's smug voice, Aunt Laura's gleeful tone, my dad's silent approval. When I got back to my apartment, I shut the door and stood in the dark for a few minutes. Normally, I'd throw on the TV or scroll my phone to distract myself, but this time, there was no distraction big enough. It all just sat there, heavy. I realized, for maybe the first time, that I was utterly alone in this. I didn't just have an unsupportive family. I had a family who saw me as entertainment, as someone they could publicly ridicule for sport. The days after were quiet, but in a hollow kind of way. I went to work, came home, ate whatever I could throw together, and barely spoke to anyone. I wasn't even angry in the explosive sense anymore. I felt drained, almost numb, like they'd finally succeeded in squeezing all the energy out of me. Even the thought of confronting them seemed pointless. What would I say? Please don't mock the thing that almost killed me. They'd twisted into me being sensitive again. I started dodging their calls. Aunt Laura left a voicemail about needing me to bring dessert for Tyler's birthday. My dad texted me a reminder about a family work day to help out at his house. I ignored both. I knew it would cause ripples, but for the first time, I didn't care about the ripples. I cared about getting through each day without feeling like my chest was caving in. But even as I withdrew, I couldn't stop replaying certain moments. The way the EMT's voice had changed when he checked my pulse. The doctor's firm tone when he told my family I could have died. The fact that not a single one of them, not my dad, not Aunt Laura, not Tyler, took that seriously. It was a strange combination of feelings. Shame for letting them treat me this way for so long, and something sharper underneath, the beginnings of resolve. The turning point came a week later when I got my allergy test results back. I was allergic to a specific ingredient that had been in one of Aunt Laura's homemade sauces. Severe enough that the doctor stressed I should always carry an EpiPen, avoid anything with even trace amounts, and be prepared to seek emergency help immediately if I reacted again. He gave me a written report detailing the reaction, how dangerous it had been, and how lucky I'd been to get help in time. Holding that paper in my hands, I felt a shift. This wasn't just my word against theirs anymore. This was documented, indisputable fact, and they had mocked it. Not in private, not in some heat-of-the-moment remark, but in front of the entire family, with a prize for the best punchline. I didn't share the results with them. Not yet. Instead, I tucked the report away in a drawer and started making small changes. I cut down even further on contact. I kept my social media quiet. I started tracking every incident in a private document, every message, every comment, every little jab. At first, it was just a way to get it out of my head. But the more I wrote, the more I started to see patterns and possibilities. Meanwhile, the silence didn't go unnoticed. I heard from a cousin that Aunt Laura had been telling people I was pouting and isolating myself to make them feel guilty. Tyler apparently thought it was hilarious and said I'd probably show up at Christmas with a medical alert bracelet just for attention. My dad, he told people he was giving me space to cool off, as if he was the reasonable one in all this. It should have hurt, but instead, it clarified something for me. These people weren't going to change. They weren't going to apologize. And if I kept showing up, they were going to keep feeding off whatever reaction they could squeeze out of me. The only way to shift anything was to stop playing the role entirely, but not before making sure they felt the consequences of how they'd treated me. I didn't know exactly what form that would take yet. All I knew was that for the first time in my life, I was done reacting on their terms. And when the perfect opportunity finally presented itself, I was ready. It's funny how quickly life can start to feel different once you stop pouring your energy into people who only drain it. After that day, I tucked away my allergy report. Things slowly started shifting. Without the constant undercurrent of family drama dragging me under, I suddenly had time, and more importantly, mental space, to focus on myself. I poured it into work first. I'd been at my job for years, coasting under the radar, always doing enough to be reliable, but never pushing for more. Now, I threw myself into projects, stayed late, volunteered for assignments no one else wanted. It wasn't about proving anything to my family anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could take up space in the world without their permission. By the end of the quarter, my manager called me in and told me I'd been nominated for a promotion. It came with a significant pay raise, but what hit me harder was the way she said, "You've really stepped up lately." I walked out of that meeting feeling taller than I had in years. Outside of work, I started making small investments in my own happiness. I signed up for a cooking class, partly because I wanted to learn how to make food I knew was safe for me, but also because I enjoyed it. I joined a gym, not out of guilt or obligation, but because it felt good to feel stronger. I even started reconnecting with old friends I'd drifted away from, people who actually cared how I was doing and didn't treat my existence like a running joke. The more I built this separate life, the less their noise mattered. Aunt Laura's digs didn't sting when I heard about them secondhand. Tyler's smugness seemed almost pathetic in comparison to the small, steady wins I was racking up. My dad's dismissive tone in the few texts we exchanged read more like a desperate attempt to keep me on the hook than anything resembling authority. And then something unexpected happened. My cooking instructor, who was also a local event coordinator, asked if I'd be interested in volunteering at a food festival in the city. It was a big deal, a mix of restaurants, culinary schools, and local talent. I said yes without thinking too hard about it, and it ended up being one of the best decisions I'd ever made. Over that weekend, I met people from all over, chefs, business owners, vendors. I found myself in conversations I'd never have imagined a year ago, and one of those conversations turned into an opportunity to collaborate on a small project for a catering company. It was paid, flexible, and something I could do alongside my main job. By the time it wrapped up, they asked if I'd be open to more freelance work. Suddenly, I wasn't just doing well at my job. I had a growing side income doing something I enjoyed. I started putting that money into savings, quietly building a financial cushion. And with each month that passed, I felt less and less tied to the version of me they'd always known. The one who was always struggling or too sensitive or not pulling his weight. Of course, my family noticed the distance. They noticed even more when I started politely declining invitations to smaller gatherings. My reasons were simple. Can't make it this time. I have plans. Not excuses. Not justifications. Just boundaries. And that's when the texts started shifting in tone. My dad's short reminders about events turned into, "Haven't seen you in a while. Everyone's wondering what you've been up to." Aunt Laura's passive-aggressive comments became more pointed. "Hope you're not letting that little incident keep you away from the family." Tyler didn't reach out at all, but I knew from a cousin that he'd been telling people I thought I was too good for them now. They were curious. They were unsettled. And, for the first time in my life, I had something they didn't control. I knew things they didn't know. I was building a life they hadn't touched, one that was starting to outshine the one they thought they'd defined for me. I wasn't ready to make a move just yet, but the next big family event was coming up, the kind of gathering where everyone would be there. And I had an idea forming in the back of my mind. Because now, I had the resources, the proof, and the confidence to flip the script completely. The opportunity arrived sooner than I expected. It was my mom who first mentioned it. In one of her rare, short calls where she kept her voice neutral, almost like she didn't want my dad or Aunt Laura overhearing. "You know your dad's turning 60 this year, right? Laura's planning a big surprise party. Everyone's coming." She hesitated before adding, "It's supposed to be formal. She's really going all out." I could practically see it in my head. Aunt Laura using the event to cement her image as the perfect hostess, Tyler strutting around like he was the co-host, my dad basking in the attention. And me? I'd be expected to quietly show up, contribute in some way, and endure whatever jokes they decided to toss my way that night. Only this time, I wasn't going to be the one caught off guard. The first piece of useful information fell into my lap a few days later. A catering contact from the food festival, someone I'd kept in touch with, posted on social media about booking a huge private party on the same date my mom had mentioned. The location? A high-end event hall in town. It didn't take much to confirm it was the same one Aunt Laura had chosen for my dad's party. Not only did I now know where it would be, I also knew who was catering it, and I had a direct line to them. That's when an idea began to crystallize. I didn't have the full plan yet, but I could already see ways to control the narrative for once. Ways to make the night unfold on my terms. My allergy report was still tucked away in my desk drawer, untouched since the day I got it. but the thought of it started to feel less like a medical document and more like a loaded weapon. Not in a malicious way, but in a way that could force the truth into the open without me ever raising my voice. Meanwhile, I kept playing my part. I replied to my dad's occasional texts with short but polite answers. When Aunt Laura sent out the official group message inviting me to the party, with a note that the dress code was black tie, no exceptions, I responded with a simple, looking forward to it. No sarcasm, no hint of my real intentions. Then something else fell into place. The catering company needed extra hands for a smaller event the week before the party, and they reached out to see if I'd be available. I said yes, knowing it would give me a perfect reason to chat casually with the head chef and some of the staff who'd be working my dad's event. I learned small but telling details: the exact menu, the setup schedule, even how Aunt Laura had insisted on surprise speeches after dinner. That last bit was gold. It meant there would be a moment in the evening when the entire room's attention would be focused on the front, a moment where anything said would be impossible to ignore. I didn't tip my hand to anyone. I just kept collecting information, making quiet calls, and mapping out how to use the night to my advantage. And as each piece of the puzzle slid into place, the anticipation started building. For years, they dictated the setting, the tone, and the story. But now, I had the location, the timing, and the perfect leverage to make sure the truth came out, in front of every single person who'd laughed at my expense. And best of all, they wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late to stop it. The night of my dad's 60th arrived crisp and cool, the kind of evening that made the city lights feel sharper. I showed up at the event hall right on time, dressed to the nines in a black suit that actually fit, a small detail, but one I knew would quietly throw off a few relatives who were used to making jokes about my off-the-rack clothes. I walked in with calm confidence, the kind you only have when you know exactly what's going to happen and exactly when. The hall was stunning: crystal chandeliers, neatly set round tables, and a buffet that looked like it belonged in a food magazine. I caught sight of the catering team I'd worked with before, and they gave me a subtle nod. We'd already spoken in advance. They knew about my allergy and had taken the extra step of making every single dish labeled clearly. That alone would have been enough to make Aunt Laura grit her teeth, but it was only the opening move. The first hour went as expected. People mingled, clinked glasses, made small talk. Aunt Laura made her grand rounds, introducing herself to anyone who hadn't already been subjected to her syrupy charm. Tyler was at the bar, holding court with a cluster of cousins, clearly enjoying the spotlight. My dad was in his element, greeting guests with booming laughter. I played along. I smiled, shook hands, and let them think I'd shown up just to be a good sport. And when dinner was served, I made a deliberate point of filling my plate, not just with the safe options, but with a little bit of everything. Every dish had a label, right down to the sauce ingredients. I could feel Aunt Laura watching me from across the room, her expression flickering with the smallest trace of irritation that her old, "don't be dramatic" trick wasn't going to work tonight. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for: the speeches. The lights dimmed slightly, the mic was set up, and Aunt Laura, naturally, took the stage first. She gave a long, self-congratulatory toast about how much work went into planning the party, how wonderful it was to have the whole family together, and how at the end of the day, family is about laughter and not taking ourselves too seriously. I knew exactly what she was alluding to. She passed the mic to Tyler, who gave a short, rambling speech mostly about himself, but ended it with a joke about making sure Ryan stays away from the barbecue table this time. A few polite laughs echoed through the room. My dad chuckled. That was my cue. I stood up slowly, letting the quiet build, and walked toward the stage. Aunt Laura handed me the mic with a forced smile. I could tell she wasn't expecting me to speak, but she also wasn't going to cause a scene by refusing. I started simply. I wasn't going to say anything tonight, I said, my voice even, steady. But since this is a celebration of family, I think it's the perfect time to clear something up. 2 months ago, at the cookout, I had what the doctor later confirmed was a severe allergic reaction. My airway started to close. My blood pressure dropped. If the ambulance had been 10 minutes later, I might not be standing here tonight. The room went quiet. No shifting chairs. No clinking glasses. Just stillness. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folded paper, the allergy report, complete with the doctor's notes. This is the medical documentation. Every symptom, every detail, I keep it with me now, just in case. And I want everyone here to know that in the middle of that reaction, my own family accused me of faking it. They laughed about it. They turned it into a game. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I could see heads turning toward Aunt Laura and my dad. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, I continued. I'm telling you because for years, I've been the butt of the joke. And I let it slide because I thought keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. But this, I tapped the paper lightly. This is the line. I'm done playing that role. I handed the paper to the cousin sitting closest to the stage. Pass it around if you want. It's not my word against anyone's. It's the truth in black and white. Then, without raising my voice or adding anything dramatic, I set the mic back on the stand and walked off stage. I didn't look at Aunt Laura or Tyler or my dad. I just returned to my seat, picked up my glass of water, and took a sip while the silence hung heavy over the room. That silence was worth every second of planning. But it was the reaction that came next, slow, subtle, and then suddenly sharp. That told me the night was far from over. It started with whispers, soft at first, like people were trying to process what they'd just heard. Then the murmurs grew into clusters of quiet conversations, heads leaning toward each other. I didn't have to listen closely to know the tone had shifted. The polite smiles were gone, replaced with uneasy glances toward the front of the room. Aunt Laura was frozen beside the podium, still holding her wine glass like she couldn't decide whether to take a sip or throw it. My dad's face was flushed, not with embarrassment, but with that stubborn, bristling defensiveness he always got when someone challenged him in public. Tyler, on the other hand, was grinning in disbelief, as if waiting for someone to jump in and save them from this awkwardness. Only no one did. Instead, an older cousin, one who'd been at that cookout and apparently hadn't realized the severity of what happened, walked up to me at the table. "Ryan, I didn't know it was like that. I'm sorry. That's not okay." He said it loud enough for nearby relatives to hear, and I caught the flicker of discomfort on my dad's face. Another aunt chimed in, agreeing. Then a few more voices joined, all at once. The social tide was turning right in front of them. Aunt Laura tried to recover, stepping forward with a laugh that sounded paper-thin. "Well, I think we can all agree Ryan's making a bigger deal out of this than necessary." "Laura," someone cut her off sharply from across the room. "He almost died. That's not a joke. That was it. The dam broke." People started questioning them outright. "Why didn't you take it seriously? Why turn it into a game? Did you really hand out a barbecue gift card after that?" The catering staff, who'd overheard enough while setting up, quietly confirmed the menu labels were something they decided to do after I told them my story. That alone made Aunt Laura's "it's fine" attitude look even worse. My dad stood, trying to quiet the room, but the more he spoke, the worse it got. His insistence that it was all in good fun only made the pushback louder. For the first time in my life, I watched them lose control of the narrative, not because I yelled or stormed out, but because their own behavior was finally being held up to the light, in front of the very audience they'd always performed for. The rest of the night was tense. Some relatives avoided them entirely, gravitating toward me instead. Others left early, clearly uncomfortable. The speeches were over, the easy laughter gone. As for me, I stayed until dessert, enjoying quiet conversations with people I'd barely spoken to at past gatherings. And when I finally got up to leave, I walked past Aunt Laura and my dad without a word. My dad muttered something under his breath, but I didn't slow down. I didn't need to. The last thing I saw before stepping out into the night was Aunt Laura standing alone at the empty podium, scanning the room like she was still trying to figure out how everything had flipped so fast. And for the first time in years, I realized they weren't laughing anymore.
Thank you for watching the entire video. If you like it, please subscribe to the channel.